Chapter 14. The Snare. Jim Horner, cruising along his trap line early in the morning, heard the lonesome call of a wolf. The howl was repeated at intervals and then suddenly stopped, as if the lone caller had then found his friends. The old man kept a sharp lookout and later caught sight of Grayback and the Black moving together slowly down a moose path across the valley. Jim quickly shoved up the sights of his rifle for a far shot and fired 2 bullets before the wolves could spring out of view. He was flustered by this unexpected meeting with Blackie's big pup and made bad misses. He saw no more of the two, but when he walked back on the same trail, he found wolf tracks in his own footprints and knew that after his departure they had come down there to find out as much as they could about their enemy. It gave him something akin to shivers when a little further along the trail he came upon what was left of a leather jacket he had laid beside. It was ripped into shreds. He saw by the tracks that the smaller wolf stood guard, while the larger did the work. Some pieces of the jacket were cut off cleanly by the powerful shearing teeth in the back of the jaws. Filth was scattered over the remnants. And this was not the last of the incident. That night the wolves trailed the trapper and tore to pieces a red fox caught in one of his snares. When they came as far as his shack, they tried to decoy the husky into a fight. Jim had very little sleep. Again and again the husky, who was safely indoors where he was supposed to lie beside a pile of dried pelts, would hear or smell the wolves and launch into a fit of barking. Scolding him only checked the noise for the moment. At length Jim became disgusted and ordered the husky out of the door. He carried his rifle in readiness but caught no glimpses of the wolves, for the dog lost its nerve and would not leave the doorway. It was a bright moonlit night with a sharp wind, which made the shadows of the trees move weirdly. The dog quieted down, and Jim, once more in his bunk, rested more easily. The wolves' nerves were still on edge. Grayback in particular remained restless and uneasy from the day's experiences. At length, however, the two started for the big spruce timber on the left side of the Porcupine and made beds in a snowbank. Now and then they awoke long enough to lick their wounds and eat a few mouthfuls of snow, which served the same purpose as a cooling drink. Even the moose, deer, and birds ate snow in winter when water was all frozen over or to be found only at a few warm springs. At daylight, 4 big wolves came trotting through the woods within a few jumps of the resting pair. As soon as they caught wolf scent, they stopped to investigate. The Black, ever watchful, rose stiffly to meet them. Grayback slunk away and studied them from behind some trees. After careful scrutiny, the pup began to wag his tail. He had recognized the leader as Old Brown Chest. Blackie was among them too. Last to come forward, she instantly recognized the 2 brothers by scent and made a fuss over them, which Grayback, who had not seen her for a long time, did not understand, and which the black pup met with great joy. They licked noses and romped about. Then all 6 started off together on a hunt. With Blackie were 2 big brownish puppies, which were all that the trappers had left of a litter of 6. These 2 chased rabbits and ran riot in a way which showed that Old Brown Chest, once the great leader, was fast losing his control. He was just as crafty, however. Again and again he stopped to study trails before setting foot in them, or stood sniffing the air where his experience told him that there might be traps. Close to him ranged the Black, just as cautiously, yet with much quicker thought and action. The continual pottering about and delay in the march irked the pup, especially as the jealous old leader would not tolerate any interference. At length the Black could stand it no longer, and so picked his own path. Grayback followed him. Blackie and the 2 young pups remained with Brown Chest and continued up the valley. A deer snorted in the willows. Grayback at once circled to the right, while the Black went to the left. A thumping of hooves warned that the crafty animal had caught the scent and dashed straight away. The wolves followed the trail in the easy loping gait that never seemed to tire them. As soon as the deer began to circle, the Black turned aside to intercept him, plunged into a side path, and then stopped almost as if he had been shot. He had caught both the scent of old Jim and of iron. The speed and weight carried him forward 2 steps, however, and right into a snare of double wire, which closed like a vice about his body when he gave a leap to one side. He knew he was caught at last, that the trapper had scored against him again, that now he could only struggle and wait like other wolves he had seen until he hung himself or until the enemy came stalking to kill him. And so he did not struggle, but set about pawing desperately at the wire to free himself. His neck had passed safely through, and the noose had tightened between his front legs, the loop going over his shoulders. The wire was so placed that he could not reach the noose part either with tooth or claw. A few violent jumps would tighten it fatally, such jumps as his wild spirit craved. Instead, he intelligently tested the wire with his teeth from the nearest point he could reach, all the way up to the fastening at the crotch of a cottonwood tree, which was nearly 6 feet over his head, and was reached only by standing on hind legs with his forepaws against the tree trunk to steady him. His shearers, that could cut small bones as easily as scissors, went through braid, grated futilely on the steel, so he ripped at the bark and pulled off strips. The gnawing relieved his fear and anger. He continued to rip and pull. The pile of chips gradually grew. A sharp point at the end of the wire cut his lips and spurred him on. His great tusks fairly massacred the soft wood. With all his weight and strength, he tore out pieces, tossed them to one side, and seized new mouthfuls. Grayback, in the course of an hour, left the deer trail and came back to find him, but one look at the raging animal in this predicament and one whiff of the fury scent were enough for him. Like the coward he always was, he sneaked away. Crouching in a thicket some distance down the valley, he glimpsed old Jim plodding up the trail, rifle on shoulder and husky at the heels. Grayback crouched lower and then sneaked further into the forest. The stout young cottonwood creaked and slowly toppled. The fall of the top tore away the last binding shreds and freed the wire. The great wolf leaped away, carrying the wire with him. Again he sprang. The wire caught feebly on a bush but jerked loose. With each fresh leap, it bounced and rustled among the twigs and made the noose cut into the chest and shoulders. A violent barking brought the black to his senses. The husky, hearing the strange noise, had run ahead, and, brave enough by daylight to raise a fuss, was calling his master. The black guessed what it all meant, and ran straight through the brush and up the nearest mountain. When the wire caught, he fought it. When the dog came too close, he chomped his jaws and gave a growl which even Jim heard far below in the valley. Once above the timber and among the rocks, the loose end of the wire no longer caught. The wolf stopped for breath. 30 feet away, the dog stopped too and barked hotly. The wolf, tired and harassed, looked back at the noisy coward, and at first expected him to attack. His upper lip curled back, and he braced himself. When the dog came no closer, he suddenly resumed his flight. Up among the bigger rocks, he stopped again and lay in wait behind a boulder. As the black and white head appeared, eyes eagerly looking forward, tongue lolling out as the dog yapped his excitement, the black shot forth, and by impact and surprise alone sent him head over heels down the rock slide. Jim, still toiling upward through the timber, saw the wolf standing on a rock looking downhill at the cringing dog. Whipping out his binoculars, he caught the baleful gleam of the black eyes under the puckered brows. Suddenly that gleam was turned full on him as the wolf caught sight of his figure. Then gradually the expression changed. It became almost wistful, as if the great wild dog were asking, "Why can't you just leave me alone?" Slowly the hunted animal turned away, and forlornly began again the steep climb, the tail of the wire trailing behind him and pulling now and then against that panting chest. In spite of his size and experience, by age he was still a puppy, for an Alberta male wolf could scarcely be called mature until about 2 years old. Many developed character until past 3 years, and all grew in wisdom with every day they lived. Old Jim, with heart as cold and hard as an icicle, raised the rifle, steadied it against a tree, and slowly pressed the trigger. Dust flew up around the wolf, but he kept on. Again the careful aim. At the shot, the black animal seemed to flinch. A splinter of rock, let loose by the impact of the bullet, had struck him on the jaw. He looked back over his shoulder at the man, but never stopped climbing. Suddenly the crest was reached, and he was safe.